Alex Carter had always prided himself on being good in a crisis, but sitting in the detention bay of an alien warship roughly the size of Manhattan was testing even his legendary optimism. The walls hummed with energy that made his teeth ache, and the gravity felt just wrong enough to remind him constantly that he wasn't on Earth anymore. He'd been aboard the Zephyrian Imperial flagship for exactly 3 hours, and so far his diplomatic mission was going about as well as a chocolate teapot. "Commander Carter," the translation device on the wall crackled to life, "Her Imperial Majesty will see you now." Alex straightened his uniform, which had seen better days since his impromptu collision with what turned out to be a cloaked alien scout ship. Right. Time to either save humanity or accidentally declare war on half the galaxy. No pressure. The escort that arrived consisted of 4 beings who looked like they'd stepped out of a fantasy novel written by someone with serious authority issues. They were tall, graceful, and moved with the kind of synchronized precision that suggested either extensive military training or a really good choreographer. Their skin had a faint luminescent quality, like moonlight on water, and their ears swept back in elegant points that would have made any elf jealous. "This way, honored guest," the lead guard said in accented English that somehow made even basic directions sound like poetry. The corridor they led him through was vast enough to comfortably house a small town, with walls that shifted color as they walked. Alex found himself gawking despite his best efforts to maintain diplomatic composure. "Nice place you've got here," he said to his escort. "Very spacious. Do you guys have a homeowners association, or is the decorating committee just really enthusiastic?" The guard looked puzzled. The Imperial flagship was constructed according to specifications approved by the Architectural Council of the Third Spiral. All aesthetic choices reflect the glory of the Empire. "Of course they do," Alex muttered. "Silly me." The throne room, because of course it was a throne room, was approximately the size of a small airport terminal and decorated with the kind of opulent excess that suggested someone had told an interior designer they had unlimited budget and no concept of restraint. Crystalline formations grew from the walls like frozen waterfalls, each one pulsing with soft light that seemed to respond to some invisible rhythm. At the far end, on a throne that appeared to be carved from a single massive gemstone, sat Empress Lyralii of the Zephyrian Empire. Alex had read her file during the 3-day journey from Earth, but no amount of intelligence briefing could have prepared him for the reality of her presence. She was tall, even-seated, with the same luminescent skin as her guards but somehow more pronounced, as if she were lit from within. Her hair fell in waves of silver that seemed to move with their own gravity, and her eyes were the deep purple of a nebula at midnight. The pointed ears that marked her species were adorned with jewelry that probably cost more than Earth's annual defense budget. She was, Alex realized with a sinking feeling in his stomach, absolutely stunning. "Commander Alexander Carter of the Terran Diplomatic Corps," she said, her voice carrying easily across the vast space without seeming to be raised. "Approach." Alex walked the length of the throne room, acutely aware that each step echoed in the cavernous space. When he reached what seemed like an appropriate distance, he stopped and offered what he hoped was a respectful bow. "Your Imperial Majesty. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, especially considering the unusual circumstances of our first contact." Empress Lyralii studied him with the kind of intense attention that made Alex feel like a particularly interesting specimen under a microscope. "You refer to the collision between your vessel and our scout ship?" "Yes, about that. I want to formally apologize for the accident. Our sensors didn't detect your ship due to your cloaking technology, and I take full responsibility for the incident. The collision was deemed accidental by our investigation," the Empress said. "However, your response to the situation was unconventional." Alex winced. "I'm guessing most species don't try to fix the damage with duct tape and good intentions." "Most species do not possess duct tape," she replied, and Alex could swear he saw the corner of her mouth twitch slightly. "Nor do they typically offer to buy the first round when negotiating reparations. In my defense, it was a very stressful situation, and I default to humor when I'm nervous. Which, given that I'm currently standing in front of the ruler of half the known galaxy, means I'm probably going to say something inappropriate in the next 30 seconds. This time there was definitely a smile. Your honesty is refreshing, Commander. Most beings who stand before this throne spend considerable effort attempting to impress us with elaborate flattery. Would elaborate flattery work better? Because I can absolutely switch gears if needed. I've been practicing my "Your Majesty is as radiant as a distant star" speech since I got here. That would be unnecessary. Empress Lyralii rose from her throne, and Alex had to crane his neck slightly to meet her eyes. She was at least 6.5 feet tall, not counting the elaborate crown that added another few inches. We are more interested in substance than style. Good, because my style mainly consists of making inappropriate jokes at diplomatic functions and occasionally setting things on fire by accident. You have experience with diplomatic fires? Both literal and metaphorical. There was an incident with a ceremonial candle at the Martian trade negotiations that we don't talk about anymore. The Empress descended the steps from her throne with fluid grace, her elaborate robes, which seemed to be woven from starlight and good intentions, flowing around her like liquid metal. Commander Carter, your species has achieved faster-than-light travel, established colonies throughout your solar system, and developed technology that borders on the miraculous. Yet you present yourself as incompetent. Not incompetent, Alex corrected. Just human. We're really good at making things work through creative problem-solving and sheer bloody-mindedness, but we're terrible at making it look elegant while we do it. This troubles you? Not really. I figure if you're going to make mistakes, you might as well make them interesting. Alex gestured around the opulent throne room. Though I have to admit, this is a pretty intimidating place to make mistakes. Do you actually use all this space, or is it just for show? The throne room serves multiple functions, Empress Lyralii said, moving to stand beside a crystalline formation that pulsed with soft blue light. It is a place of ceremony, of state functions, and of judgment. But you are correct that it can be overwhelming. It's beautiful, Alex said honestly. But it must get lonely, all this grandeur with just you in the middle of it. Something flickered across the Empress's face, too quick for Alex to identify. Loneliness is a luxury rulers cannot afford. That sounds like something someone taught you to say rather than something you actually believe. You are very perceptive for a species we have only just encountered. Or maybe loneliness is universal, regardless of what galaxy you're from. Alex looked around the vast space again, taking in the incredible beauty and obvious expense of everything he could see. Don't get me wrong, this is all amazing, but I'd go crazy rattling around in here by myself. You prefer smaller spaces? I prefer spaces with people in them. My apartment back on Earth isn't much to look at, but my neighbors are always borrowing sugar or complaining about the noise, and there's this coffee shop downstairs where the owner knows my order before I walk through the door. Alex shrugged. It's not glamorous, but it's home. Empress Lyralii was quiet for a moment, studying the crystal formation beside her as if it held answers to questions she hadn't asked yet. Your world sounds chaotic. Absolutely. But chaos can be fun if you don't take it too seriously. Alex grinned. Though I suspect taking things seriously is a big part of your job description. The fate of billions depends upon our decisions. Levity is not always appropriate. Maybe not, but neither is forgetting that all those billions are individual people with their own hopes and dreams and really bad jokes. Alex watched her face carefully, looking for signs that he was overstepping diplomatic boundaries. Besides, if you can't laugh at the absurdity of existence occasionally, what's the point of existing? The Empress turned to look at him directly, her purple eyes reflecting the light from the crystals around them. Is that human philosophy? That's Alex Carter philosophy, which is probably less profound but definitely more practical. And what does Alex Carter philosophy suggest we do about the diplomatic crisis your collision has created? Alex blinked. Crisis? I thought we were just working out reparations for the damage to your scout ship. Commander Carter, Empress Lyralii said gently, your species has made first contact with the Zephyrian Empire by accidentally ramming one of our vessels and then attempting to repair it with primitive adhesive materials. The Galactic Council is watching our response very carefully. Oh, Alex said slowly, the full implications beginning to dawn on him. So this isn't just about fixing a dent in your spaceship. This is about whether humanity is ready to join the galactic community or whether you require additional time to develop appropriate protocols for interspecies contact. Alex looked around the throne room again, seeing it now not as an impressive display of alien architecture but as the center of political power for half the known galaxy. And I'm the guy who gets to represent all of humanity in that decision. You are. Well, Alex said, straightening his shoulders, I guess we'd better make sure I don't accidentally start a war before dinner. For the first time since he'd entered the throne room, Empress Lyralii smiled, not the polite, diplomatic expression he'd seen before, but something genuine and warm that transformed her entire face. Commander Carter, she said, I believe this may be the beginning of a very interesting diplomatic relationship. Alex's guest quarters aboard the Imperial flagship were roughly the size of his entire apartment building back on Earth, which would have been impressive if they hadn't also been decorated in a style that could best be described as, what happens when royalty has unlimited resources and questionable taste. The bed alone was the size of a small landing pad and appeared to hover 3 feet off the ground without any visible means of support. Magnetic field suspension, he said to himself, running his hand underneath the floating mattress. Either that or they've figured out how to domesticate gravity. Either way, I'm definitely not sleeping well tonight. A soft chime indicated someone was at his door, which was less a door and more a section of wall that dissolved when approached by authorized personnel. Alex had spent 20 minutes that morning trying to figure out how to make it work before discovering that the ship's AI had been politely waiting for him to stop cursing at the wall and simply ask for help. Empress Lyralii stood in the doorway, or door space, since there wasn't actually a door, wearing robes that were slightly less formal than her throne room attire but still managed to make Alex feel underdressed in his best diplomatic uniform. Your Imperial Majesty, Alex said, offering what he hoped was an appropriate bow. I wasn't expecting a personal visit. We thought it would be beneficial to personally ensure your comfort during your stay, she replied, stepping into the room with the kind of fluid grace that made Alex suspect all Zephyrians had secret ballet training. Well, I can't complain about the accommodations. Though I have to ask, is the bathroom supposed to read my emotional state and adjust the water temperature accordingly? Because that was either a really thoughtful feature or a really invasive one. The ship's environmental systems are designed to optimize comfort for all occupants. If the adaptive responses are troubling you, they can be disabled. No, it's fine. Just caught me off guard when the shower started playing what I can only assume was soothing Zephyrian music when I was feeling homesick. Alex gestured toward the sitting area, which featured furniture that looked like it had been grown rather than built. Would you like to sit? Though I should warn you, I have no idea how to work the hospitality systems, so I can't offer you anything except terrible jokes and questionable life advice. Empress Lyralii settled onto one of the organic-looking chairs with practiced elegance. Your company is sufficient. We rarely have the opportunity for informal conversation. I find that hard to believe. You must have advisors, court officials, people you can relax with. We have subjects who defer to our authority and dignitaries who seek our favor. Informal conversation implies equality of participants. Alex sat across from her, noting how her formal language seemed to slip slightly when she was away from the throne room. And you can't have equality when you're the supreme ruler of half the galaxy. It is not permitted by protocol. Whose protocol? She was quiet for a moment, her luminescent skin seeming to pulse slightly in the soft light of the quarters. Imperial protocol. Tradition. The expectations of our position. Right, but whose idea was it originally? I mean, someone must have decided that emperors and empresses shouldn't have friends. Was it the emperors who wanted distance from their subjects, or the subjects who thought their rulers should be untouchable? That is, an interesting question. We confess we have never considered the origin of such protocols. Maybe it's time to start. Alex leaned back in his chair, which immediately adjusted its shape to support him more comfortably. On Earth, we have a saying, it's lonely at the top. But that's because people choose to make it lonely, not because it has to be. Your leaders maintain personal relationships. Absolutely. Our current president plays poker with her college roommates every month, and our Secretary of Defense is godfather to his aides' kids. Power doesn't have to mean isolation unless you let it. Empress Lyraliai's expression was thoughtful, almost wistful. We have ruled for 147 of your years. In that time, we have spoken informally with perhaps a dozen individuals. That's terrible, Alex said without thinking, then caught himself. I mean, that's... I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I didn't mean to be presumptuous. You meant it was a tragedy, she said quietly. And you are not incorrect. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the only sound the soft hum of the ship's systems and the distant thrum of the massive engines that powered their journey through space. Tell us about your home, Empress Lyraliai said finally. You spoke of neighbors and coffee shops. Paint us a picture of this chaotic world you seem to love. Alex grinned, settling more comfortably in his chair. Well, for starters, my building superintendent is a 70-year-old woman named Mrs. Patterson who thinks the solution to every problem is either tea or threats. She once convinced a city inspector to approve our heating system by offering him homemade cookies and implying she knew where he lived. She threatened a government official. Mrs. Patterson doesn't threaten. She makes observations about reality that happen to sound ominous. Like, it would be a shame if someone reported your illegal parking to your wife, or, I hope your mother doesn't hear about how you speak to elderly ladies. To his surprise, Empress Lyraliai laughed, not the polite, measured response he'd expected, but genuine amusement that transformed her entire face. This Mrs. Patterson sounds formidable. Terrifying, Alex confirmed. But also the first person to bring me soup when I had the flu, and she makes sure the building's heat works properly in winter even if she has to threaten the repair company with creative interpretations of consumer protection laws. She sounds like an excellent leader. That's the thing about humans, we don't really distinguish between official leaders and people who just naturally take charge. Mrs. Patterson runs our building more efficiently than most governments run their countries, but she'd never consider herself a ruler. Perhaps that is what makes her effective. Probably. Alex studied the Empress's face, noting how relaxed she seemed compared to the formal figure he'd met in the throne room. Can I ask you something that might be inappropriate? We find your inappropriate questions more illuminating than most people's careful diplomacy. When was the last time someone called you by your name? Not your title, just your name. The question seemed to catch her off guard. She was quiet for so long that Alex began to wonder if he'd finally crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Our birth name has not been spoken aloud in our presence for decades, she said finally. Upon ascending to the throne, we became Your Imperial Majesty in all formal interactions. What about informal interactions? There are no informal interactions with an empress. There are now, Alex said firmly. I'm Alex, by the way. Not Commander Carter or representative of humanity or any other title. Just Alex. And you are. Another long pause, as if she were wrestling with concepts that challenged everything she'd been taught about her position. Lyraliai, she said quietly, and Alex noticed that her formal speech patterns had completely disappeared. My name is Lyraliai. It's beautiful. It suits you. Alex smiled. See? Much better than all that, Your Imperial Majesty stuff. Though I probably shouldn't use it in front of your court officials. Definitely not. They would likely interpret such familiarity as either a sign of dangerous disrespect or evidence that you possess some form of mind control technology. Mind control technology? How else could a mere human convince an empress to abandon centuries of protocol? Lyraliai's eyes sparkled with mischief. Clearly you must be using advanced psychological manipulation techniques. Either that or I'm just too stupid to know when I'm being inappropriate. Alex grinned. Though I prefer the mind control theory. Makes me sound more competent. You are more competent than you pretend to be, Lyralii observed. We have read your file. Youngest commander in Terran Diplomatic Corps history, degrees in both xenobiology and interstellar law, and commendations for creative problem-solving in hostile environments. You've been doing homework on me. It is prudent to understand those who represent potential allies. Or potential threats. And which am I? Lyralii was quiet for a moment, studying his face with that same intense attention he'd noticed in the throne room. We are still determining that. Though we suspect you may be the most dangerous kind of person. Which is? Someone who makes others want to be better than they are. Alex felt something shift in the space between them, a subtle change in the atmosphere that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental controls. Is that necessarily a bad thing? For an empress who has built her authority on distance and formal protocol? Potentially catastrophic. Or potentially liberating. We will have to see. They talked for another 2 hours, conversation flowing easily between topics ranging from interstellar politics to favorite foods to the challenge of maintaining relationships across vast distances. By the time Lyralii rose to leave, the formal barriers between them had eroded so completely that Alex almost forgot he was talking to one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Thank you, she said as she reached the doorway. We had not realized how much we missed, conversation. Thank you for taking the risk, Alex replied. I know this isn't exactly standard Imperial protocol. Perhaps it is time to establish new protocols. Lyralii paused at the threshold, looking back at him with an expression that was both hopeful and uncertain. Would you be interested in dining with us tomorrow evening? Informally, of course. I'd like that very much. Though I should probably warn you that my table manners are questionable at best. We will take our chances. After she left, Alex found himself staring at the space where she'd been standing, trying to process what had just happened. He'd come to the Zephyrian flagship expecting formal diplomatic negotiations and carefully worded treaties. Instead, he'd somehow managed to become friends with an empress who'd been isolated by her own power for over a century. Well, he said to the empty room, this is either going to be the best diplomatic mission in human history or the most spectacular failure ever recorded. The room's environmental system, apparently interpreting his mood, began playing soft, optimistic music that sounded remarkably like hope. The state dining hall was approximately the size of a football stadium and decorated with enough precious metals and exotic crystals to fund a small planet's economy for several decades. Alex stood at the entrance, wearing his best formal uniform and fighting the urge to whistle at the sheer audacity of the decor, while a protocol officer explained the seating arrangements with the kind of reverent detail usually reserved for religious ceremonies. The Valtorian ambassador will be seated according to the Treaty of the Seventh Nebula, the officer intoned, which grants them precedence over the Krillian delegation but places them subordinate to the representatives of the hegemony of. Alex stopped listening somewhere around the 15th different species and their complex hierarchy of diplomatic importance. Instead, he focused on not tripping over his own feet when he inevitably had to navigate the maze of tables, each one apparently positioned according to centuries of interstellar politics and at least 3 different systems of ceremonial precedence. Commander Carter, the protocol officer said, finally reaching the end of his exhaustive briefing, you will be seated at the high table, to the left of Her Imperial Majesty. The high table. A position of great honor, traditionally reserved for visiting royalty or heads of state. Alex looked across the vast dining hall to where a raised platform held a table that appeared to be carved from a single piece of crystallized starlight. Right. No pressure there. The other guests began arriving in small groups, each delegation announced with enough ceremony to make a royal wedding look understated. Alex watched in fascination as beings from across the galaxy filed into the hall, representing species he'd only read about in xenobiology textbooks. There were the Voltorians, tall and ethereal with skin that shifted color based on their emotional state. The Krillians looked like someone had asked a committee of artists to design the most elegant possible lizard people. The hegemony representatives were so heavily augmented with cybernetic implants that it was difficult to tell where their original biology ended and their technology began. "Fascinating, is it not?" a voice said beside him, and Alex turned to find himself face to face with what appeared to be a floating jellyfish wearing formal diplomatic credentials. "Very," Alex replied, trying not to stare at the being's translucent body and gently pulsing bioluminescent organs. "I'm Alex Carter, representing Earth." "Ambassador Zekta of the floating cities of Meridia," the jellyfish replied through a translation device that gave its voice a tinny, electronic quality. "We have heard much about your species' dramatic introduction to galactic society." "You mean the part where I accidentally rammed into a Zephyrian ship and then tried to fix it with duct tape?" "Indeed. Your creative approach to crisis management has become something of a legend among the diplomatic corps. I'm not sure whether to be flattered or horrified." "In our experience," Ambassador Zekta said, its bioluminescent organs pulsing in what Alex hoped was amusement, "the most effective diplomats are those who inspire both reactions simultaneously." Before Alex could respond to that observation, a series of harmonic tones announced the arrival of Empress Lyralii. The assembled guests immediately arranged themselves in what was clearly a well-rehearsed formation, each delegation taking positions that reflected their species' relationship to the Zephyrian Empire. Alex found himself swept along with the crowd toward the high table, trying not to gawk too obviously at the Empress as she took her place at the center of the crystalline platform. She wore robes that seemed to incorporate actual starlight into their fabric, and her crown was a work of art that managed to be both incredibly elaborate and somehow perfectly suited to her features. Their eyes met briefly as he approached his assigned seat, and he saw a flicker of something that might have been nervousness behind her formal expression. It occurred to him that this was probably as strange for her as it was for him, sharing a formal state dinner with someone she'd actually had a conversation with. "Honored guests," Empress Lyralii said, her voice carrying easily across the vast hall without seeming to be amplified, "we welcome you to this gathering in the spirit of mutual understanding and galactic cooperation." The formal speeches that followed were exactly what Alex had expected from his diplomatic training, carefully worded statements about trade agreements, territorial boundaries, and the importance of maintaining peaceful relations among species. He found his attention drifting to the Empress, watching how she navigated the complex web of formal protocol with practiced ease while somehow managing to acknowledge each speaker with exactly the right degree of attention and respect. The food, when it finally arrived, was an adventure in itself. Each course was apparently tailored to the dietary requirements of the various species present, which meant Alex's plate contained items that ranged from familiar-looking vegetables to what appeared to be small, geometric crystals that dissolved on his tongue with a flavor somewhere between mint and electricity. "How are you finding the cuisine, Commander Carter?" asked the being seated to his right, a member of the Krillian delegation whose scales shifted from deep blue to silver as he spoke. "Educational," Alex replied diplomatically, poking at something that might have been either a sophisticated garnish or a small, sleeping alien creature. "Though I have to admit, some of these dishes are definitely outside my experience." "The crystalline algae from the methane seas of Kepler 438b, the Krillian explained helpfully. "Considered a great delicacy among oxygen-breathing species." "Good to know." Alex took another cautious bite, noting that the crystal thing actually tasted better than it looked. "I'm still getting used to the idea that dinner can come from methane seas." "Your species' culinary traditions are equally exotic to us," the Krillian replied. "We understand you actually heat your food using controlled combustion." "Fire, yes. Very primitive, I know." "Not primitive. Fascinating. The application of chemical reactions for food preparation suggests a remarkable understanding of molecular transformation." Alex was about to respond when a server approached with yet another course, this one involving what appeared to be soup that changed color as you watched it. He was carefully studying the shifting hues, trying to determine if they indicated temperature or flavor or possibly the soup's mood, when disaster struck. The server, a young Zephyrian who looked nervous about serving at such an important function, stumbled slightly as they approached the high table. The tray tilted, and Alex watched in slow motion as a bowl of the color-shifting soup began its inevitable journey toward Empress Lyraliai's elaborate starlight robes. Without thinking, Alex lunged forward, catching the bowl just before it would have painted the ruler of half the galaxy in what smelled suspiciously like seafood bisque. Unfortunately, his heroic save required him to lean across the table at an angle that defied several laws of physics and at least one principle of diplomatic protocol. Time seemed suspended as Alex found himself nose-to-nose with Empress Lyraliai, the rescued soup bowl balanced precariously in one hand while his other arm braced against the table to keep him from falling face-first into her dinner. The entire dining hall had gone silent, hundreds of alien dignitaries staring at the spectacle of a human diplomat apparently attempting to either attack or embrace their host. "Well," Alex said, acutely aware that his face was approximately 6 inches from hers and that her eyes were even more striking up close, "this is awkward." "Indeed," Lyraliai replied, her voice carefully neutral despite what he could swear was amusement flickering in her expression. "Careful," Alex said, shifting his weight to push himself back to his proper position, "you're falling for me." He meant it as a light-hearted comment to diffuse the tension of the moment, the kind of self-deprecating humor that had gotten him through countless uncomfortable situations. What he didn't expect was for Empress Lyraliai's carefully composed expression to crack, or for her to smile with genuine warmth as she looked directly into his eyes. "Too late," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the hushed murmur of the watching crowd. The words hit Alex like a physical blow, not because they were unexpected but because they were clearly, unmistakably sincere. This wasn't diplomatic banter or polite conversation. This was Lyraliai, not the Empress, but the woman he'd been talking with for the past 3 days, admitting something that would have been shocking enough in private, let alone in front of representatives from dozens of alien civilizations. The silence in the dining hall stretched on as Alex struggled to process what had just happened. Around them, he could hear the soft whisper of shocked conversations beginning in at least 6 different languages, but all of his attention was focused on the woman in front of him, who had just publicly admitted to having feelings for a human diplomat she'd known for less than a week. "Your Imperial Majesty," he said carefully, very aware that every word was being recorded and analyzed by intelligence services across the galaxy, "perhaps we should." "Commander Carter," she interrupted, her voice carrying the authority of absolute rule but somehow still managing to sound personal, "would you accompany us for a private conversation after dinner?" "Of course." "Excellent." Empress Lyraliai turned to address the stunned gathering, her demeanor shifting back to imperial composure as if nothing unusual had happened. "We trust our guests will forgive the interruption. Please, continue enjoying your meals." Conversation gradually resumed around the hall, though Alex could feel eyes on him from every direction. He managed to get through the remaining courses without further incident, but the food might as well have been cardboard for all the attention he could spare for it. The most powerful ruler in known space had just publicly admitted to having romantic feelings for him. In front of diplomatic representatives from 12 different species. At a formal state dinner. Well, he thought to himself as dessert arrived in the form of what appeared to be edible holographic projections, this is either going to be the greatest love story in galactic history or the most spectacular diplomatic disaster ever recorded. Possibly both. The Empress's private study was mercifully smaller than her throne room, though it still managed to be larger than most Earth libraries. The walls were lined with what appeared to be crystalline data storage devices that pulsed gently with stored information, and the furniture looked like it had been grown rather than manufactured. Lyraliai had changed from her formal state robes into something that was still undeniably regal but seemed designed more for comfort than intimidation. "So," Alex said, settling into a chair that immediately adjusted itself to support him perfectly, "that was interesting." "Interesting is one word for it," Lyraliai replied, pouring 2 cups of something that steamed and sparkled simultaneously from an elegant service that probably cost more than Alex's annual salary. "We believe the more accurate term would be catastrophic diplomatic incident. Hey, it could have been worse. At least nobody started shooting. The evening is young." She handed him one of the cups, her fingers brushing his briefly in the exchange. We have received 17 requests for emergency diplomatic meetings in the past hour. From who? Everyone. Lyralii settled into the chair across from him, cradling her cup in both hands. The Galactic Council wants to discuss the implications of interspecies romantic entanglements on established diplomatic protocols. The Krillian delegation is concerned about the precedent of emotional decision-making in imperial leadership. And the Valtorian ambassador sent a message consisting entirely of what our translation systems indicate are expressions of profound shock rendered in ceremonial poetry. Alex sipped his drink, which tasted like starlight would if starlight had flavor. What about your own people? The Imperial Council is currently engaged in what can only be described as controlled panic. Half of them believe we have been compromised by human psychological manipulation techniques, and the other half are convinced we have suffered some form of neurological damage that impairs our judgment. And which half is right? Lyralii was quiet for a moment, staring into her cup as if it held answers to questions she hadn't figured out how to ask yet. Neither. Both. We are not certain. Can I offer a third option? Please do. Maybe you're just a person who met another person and discovered you like each other. Alex leaned forward slightly. Maybe it's not about politics or neurological damage or manipulation. Maybe it's just human. Or Zephyrian. Or whatever the universal equivalent of two people connecting happens to be. We are not just a person, Alex. We are the Empress of the Zephyrian Empire. Our personal feelings do not exist in isolation from our political responsibilities. No, but they don't have to be mutually exclusive either. Alex set down his cup, meeting her eyes directly. Look, no, I'm not exactly an expert on interstellar politics, but I do know something about making difficult decisions under pressure. And the best leaders I've ever known were the ones who didn't forget they were human, or Zephyrian, underneath all the authority and responsibility. You think we should pursue this, whatever this is, regardless of the political consequences? I think you should make the decision that feels right to you, not the one that feels safe to everyone else. Alex smiled. Besides, from what I've seen of galactic politics so far, they could use a little shaking up. That, Lyralii said with a laugh that held equal parts amusement and terror, may be the most dangerous suggestion anyone has ever made to us. Dangerous how? Because we find ourselves wanting to follow it. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the weight of the evening's revelation settling between them like a bridge neither of them was quite ready to cross. Finally, Lyralii spoke again. Tell us honestly, Alex. What do you think of what happened tonight? Honestly? I think it was terrifying, exhilarating, and probably the bravest thing I've ever seen anyone do. Alex met her gaze steadily. You could have deflected my comment, made a joke, pretended it was diplomatic banter. Instead, you told the truth in front of people who are definitely going to use it against you politically. And you find this admirable rather than foolish? I find it human. In the best possible way. We are not human. No, but you're a person. And sometimes being a person means taking risks for things that matter, even when the smart choice would be to play it safe. Lyralii set down her cup and stood, moving to one of the crystal windows that showed the star field streaming past as the massive ship traveled through space. We have been thinking about our conversation yesterday, about loneliness and isolation and the protocols that separate rulers from the people they serve. And we realize that we have been alone for so long that we had forgotten what it felt like to genuinely connect with another being. Not as an empress to a subject, or as a political figure to a diplomatic representative, but as... She paused, searching for words. As ourselves. Alex joined her at the window, standing close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her luminescent skin. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It is if it compromises our ability to lead effectively. Or it could make you a better leader. Someone who understands both the burden of command and the value of genuine relationships. Alex looked out at the stars, thinking about Mrs. Patterson and her combination of authority and care, about the leaders he'd most respected and their ability to balance responsibility with humanity. The best commanders I knew in the service were the ones who never forgot that their decisions affected real people with real lives. Even if those relationships create conflicts of interest. Especially then. Because conflicts of interest mean you're invested in more than just abstract political outcomes. You're invested in actual people. Lyraeli turned to face him, her expression serious. Alex, if we pursue this, whatever this is, it will change everything. For both of us, for our peoples, for the entire political landscape of this region of the galaxy. I know. You could return to Earth tomorrow, file a report recommending formal diplomatic relations between our species, and live the rest of your life as the man who successfully negotiated humanity's entry into the galactic community. It would be safe, honorable, and politically advantageous for everyone involved. Probably. But? Alex took a deep breath, looking at this incredible woman who ruled half the galaxy but somehow seemed vulnerable and uncertain in this moment. But I've spent the last 5 years playing it safe, and I've never been more miserable in my life. And in the past week, talking with you, getting to know the person behind all the imperial protocol and ceremony. I've felt more like myself than I have in years. Even knowing the risks. Especially knowing the risks. Alex smiled. Besides, remember what I said about humans being really good at making things work through creative problem-solving and sheer bloody-mindedness? Yes. Well, maybe it's time to find out if Zephyrians have similar talents. Lyraeli studied his face for a long moment, her luminescent skin pulsing slightly in the soft light of the study. You are asking us to risk our empire for a relationship that has existed for less than a week with a member of a species we barely understand. No, I'm asking you to risk traditional ways of doing things for the possibility of something better. For both of us, and for both of our peoples. Alex reached out tentatively, taking her hand in his. I'm not asking you to give up being an empress. I'm asking you to be an empress who also gets to be happy. And if our happiness destabilizes galactic politics, then we'll figure out how to restabilize them. Together. Lyraeli's fingers tightened around his, and for a moment she looked less like the ruler of a vast interstellar empire and more like a woman making a decision that would change her life forever. Very well, she said quietly. Let us see what creative problem-solving can accomplish. Is that a yes to the terrifyingly complicated interspecies relationship? That is a yes to the terrifyingly complicated interspecies relationship. She smiled, the expression transforming her entire face. Though we should probably discuss the practical implications before we announce our engagement to the Galactic Council. Engagement? Alex blinked. That escalated quickly. We are an empress, Alex. We do not do anything halfway. Right. I should probably keep that in mind. You should. Along with the fact that our morning briefings start at dawn, our formal schedule includes 17 different types of ceremonial functions, and we have never successfully maintained a relationship with someone who was not either a head of state or completely fictional. Well, Alex said, pulling her closer, I guess we'll just have to figure it out as we go. Together. Together. 6 months later, Alex stood in the newly constructed Human Zephyrian Cultural Exchange Center, watching as the first group of Earth students arrived for the interspecies diplomatic training program he and Lyraeli had designed together. The center itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering, combining human practicality with Zephyrian elegance in ways that neither species could have achieved alone. Commander Carter, one of the students said, approaching him with the kind of nervous energy that reminded Alex of himself during his first meeting with the Empress, is it true that you and Her Imperial Majesty are actually married? Diplomatically bonded, Alex corrected with a grin. Which is apparently the Zephyrian equivalent, except with more paperwork and fewer relatives arguing about the seating arrangements. And you're really going to be teaching interspecies relationship dynamics? Among other things. Though I should warn you, most of my expertise comes from making spectacular mistakes and somehow surviving them. That's very reassuring, sir. It should be. Because if there's one thing humans are good at, it's turning spectacular mistakes into unexpected opportunities. Alex looked out through the center's crystal windows at the view of Earth rising over the lunar horizon, where the center had been constructed as a symbol of cooperation between worlds. And if you're very lucky, sometimes those opportunities turn into something wonderful. Behind him, Lyraliai's voice carried across the orientation hall as she welcomed the first group of Zephyrian cultural exchange participants, her formal address punctuated by the kind of genuine warmth that had become her trademark since embracing what she called leadership through authentic connection. It wasn't always easy, balancing the demands of interspecies diplomacy with the complexities of a relationship that had become a symbol of cooperation between civilizations. But it was never boring, and Alex had discovered that never boring was exactly what he'd been missing from his carefully safe, pre-collision life. Sometimes, he reflected, the best things happened when you stopped worrying about making mistakes and started focusing on making things work. Even if the process involved more duct tape and creative improvisation than most people were comfortable with. Especially then.